Committee will come to order. Good morning. While I'm beginning my 19th year as a member of the Small Business Committee, this is my first hearing as chairman. In that capacity, I look forward to working with my friend and colleague, the ranking member, Ms. Velasquez, and all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in an effort to improve the plight of American small businesses. I'm particularly pleased to see that we will begin that endeavor today by discussing a subject that has much promise for small businesses and taxpayers alike: Federal contracting reform. As you know, the government has a goal of awarding at least 23% of Federal prime contract dollars to small businesses. And in fiscal year 2013, we met that goal for the first time in many years. Early indications are that we met the goal again last year. However, it isn't enough to simply meet the goal. We have to focus on why Congress created those goals in the first place. The goals exist as a tool. They are intended to make sure we have a broad spectrum of small businesses working with the government across industries. Having a healthy small business industrial base means that taxpayers benefit from increased competition, innovation, and job creation. It also means that we can securely support programs crucial to our national defense. The percentage of dollars awarded to small businesses is a good measure of success, but it isn't the only measure. Indeed, it appears that over the last 4 years, while the percentage of dollars being awarded to small businesses was increasing, the number of contract actions with small businesses fell by almost 60%. At the Department of Defense, the number fell by almost 70%. The size of the average individual small business contract action increased by 230% during that same period and by nearly 290% at DOD. These statistics are all alarming in their own way, but one of the more clear-cut and disturbing figures is that there are over 100,000 fewer small businesses registered to do business with the Federal Government than there were in 2012. These data points suggest we have a problem with our small business industrial base. Today's witnesses are going to address specific recommendations to improve the competitive viability of our small business contractors. This is only the first of a series of full committee and subcommittee hearings we'll be having on this topic. As chairman, I expect that the committee will actively pursue ways to increase opportunities for small businesses to access capital and contracts while removing barriers to small business success. And I'm quite confident that our subcommittee chair, Mr. Hanna, and his subcommittee on contracting and workforce will be thoroughly exploring this issue in the very near future. And I look forward to working with each of you and want to welcome our witnesses here this morning. And I would now yield to the ranking member for the purpose of making an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For several decades now, the Federal Government has looked to the private sector to provide services and supplies for its day-to-day operations. As such, a vibrant industrial base has become essential to the U.S. economy and our national security. It comes as no surprise to those in this room that small businesses are at the heart of this supply chain. With a strong presence in a variety of different industries, from construction to manufacturing, small businesses continue to play a vital role in providing our government with goods and services. In order for this sector to continue its resurgence, we need to ensure that small businesses are able to compete both globally and here in America. Here at home, this means ensuring that small firms can gain access to the nearly $500 billion federal procurement marketplace. Numerous policies and protections have been put in place to ensure their continued participation in this arena. This includes goals, set-aside programs, and the assignment of federal personnel to work on behalf of small contractors. Many of these initiatives have evolved over the years to reflect the changing needs of small firms. In many regards, these efforts have paid off, as small businesses last year won nearly $100 billion in awards. However, it appears that we have stalled, and in many ways the goal is becoming a ceiling rather than a floor. And with regard to set-aside programs, we continue to see over and over again non-small businesses gaining access to small business awards, whether it's HubZone, service-disabled veterans, or 8A awards, we need stronger protections to keep bad actors out of the federal marketplace or trying to gain access to federal contracts that were designed in the first place for small businesses. Another trend is occurring that may also impact small contractors. Data shows that the average contract size is increasing. On first take, this appears to be promising as larger contracts may be more profitable for small companies. However, it might suggest that more contracts are being consolidated, resulting in fewer opportunities for small businesses. I am particularly interested in the witnesses' perspective on this during today's hearing. What is important for this committee to keep in mind is that these developments are part of a bigger picture, which is that the federal procurement marketplace is always evolving. Whether it is sequestration, reductions in federal procurement staff, or the rise of multiple award contracts, there will always be new issues for small businesses to overcome. And against this backdrop, we must ensure that small businesses are not left behind and that procurement laws evolve with this changing landscape. During today's hearing, I look forward to learning about the challenges facing small contractors and possible solutions. Doing so is not only essential for small firms and our nation's industrial base, but the economy overall. Small firm brings new ideas to the table, which in turn generate new jobs and even new industries. Taken together, this is a key part of what has made the U.S. the leader in today's economy. I thank all the witnesses for being here today, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back. And if committee members have opening statements prepared, I'd ask that they submit them for the record. And I'd like to take just a moment to explain the time rules that we operate under here, which is the same that the other committees do. It's the 5-minute rule. You'll have 5 minutes to testify. We'll have 5 minutes, each of us, to ask questions. We even have a lighting system set up for that. The green light will come on. You can talk for 4 minutes. The yellow light comes on to let you know you got 1 minute to wrap up. When the red light comes on, we'd ask that you try to terminate your testimony as close to that as possible. So we give you a little leeway, but not much. So appreciate your cooperation, and I'll now introduce our first witness, who is Randall Gibson, or Randy Gibson, our son's name. Not Gibson, but Randy. Who is president of Weitzel Green, Inc., a general contractor in Pensacola, Florida. He's also the chairman of the Associated General Contractors, AGC, Naval Facilities Engineering Command Committee, and a member of the United States Army Corps of Engineers Committee. He is testifying today on behalf of AGC. We thank you for being here, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting the Associated General Contractors of America to testify on reforms to the federal government's contracting laws important to our industry. My name is Randy Gibson. I am president of Weitzel Green Incorporated, a small business based in Pensacola, Florida, providing general contracting and design build service to Department of Defense and other federal agency clients throughout the southeastern region of the United States. Since our founding in 1970, my company has constructed over 400 heavy commercial projects, resulting in nearly $1 billion of completed contracts. While my written testimony covers all the topics for today's hearing, I will use the time allotted today to address the need for Congress to, 1, prohibit all federal agencies from procuring construction services through reverse auctions, and 2, encourage sensible consideration of past performance records in joint venture and teaming context. AGC strongly supports full and open competition for construction contracts. However, reverse auctions for construction services have the effect of turning away qualified and experienced contractors, especially small business firms like mine, for a host of reasons. Procurement of construction services is different than for manufactured goods like pens and paper. Construction services are complex, most often requiring the participation of numerous trade subcontractors and vendors in lower-tier arrangements with the general contractor. They are project-specific and inherently variable, and they require a large degree of professional expertise. In a reverse auction, non-price factors of consequence to the owner, such as quality of relationship, past performance, scheduling, long-term maintenance, and unique needs, are de-emphasized by the process. In a reverse auction, a bidder has no incentive to offer its best price. Winning bids may simply be an established increment below the second lowest bid, not the lowest responsible and responsive price. In a reverse auction, discipline is difficult to maintain. General contractors can underbid the project simply to win the award, putting the government at significant risk to receive lower quality construction and even contractor default. This also exposes subcontractors to risk for non-payment. It is my belief that AGC's position on reverse auctions is shared by other important stakeholders to the procurement process. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the White House Office of Federal Procurement Policy, and even the largest reverse auction vendor to the Federal Government, FedBid, have all publicly stated that reverse auctions for construction are not appropriate. Yet agencies like the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Department of the Interior, and the General Services Administration continue to conduct them. Considering this inconsistency, AGC urges members of this committee and Congress to enact a law that prohibits reverse auction procurement for construction services government-wide. Turning to the joint venturing and teaming issue, AGC and its members are increasingly finding that Federal agencies will disqualify small businesses from competition when they seek to partner with another business for the first time. In an environment where agencies are bundling contracts worth upwards of $100 million and specifically setting them aside for small business, it is often beyond the capacity of a small business alone to bond and perform such large dollar projects. Consequently, small businesses like my firm often seek to partner with other small or non-small businesses to win such awards. Some Federal agencies are not allowing small businesses and their partners to submit the relevant past experience of each individual company to prove qualification for the contract. Rather, agencies demand that the small business and partner submit only past experience that they have performed together or otherwise be disqualified from consideration. This limitation often prevents the government from receiving the benefit of project-specific experiences and resources which the first-time collaboration of these teams may offer. AGC strongly supports a sensible legislative solution to ensure that Federal agencies reasonably consider the individual past performances of construction contractors seeking to joint venture or team, even if they are teaming for the first time. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to answering your questions to the best of my abilities.
Thank you very much, and thank you for staying within the time constraints. Our next witness is James Hoffman, who is president of Summer Consultants, Inc. in McLean, Virginia. Prior to starting with Summer over 22 years ago, Mr. Hoffman served as a platoon leader and company executive officer in the 317th Engineer Battalion of the United States Army. He is testifying on behalf of the American Council of Engineering Companies. We thank you for being here today. We thank you for your service, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Velazquez, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today about the issues surrounding contracting in the industrial base. My name is James Hoffman, and I'm the president of Summer Consultants, a consulting mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineering firm located in McLean, Virginia. Summer Consultants is a small business with 30 employees. Our practice focuses on the Federal market for the past 50 years. My firm is an active member of the American Council of Engineering Companies, the voice of America's engineering community. AC's over 5,000 member firms represent hundreds of thousands of engineers and other specialists throughout the country, are engaging in a wide range of engineering works that propel the nation's economy and enhance and safeguard America's quality of life. Almost 85% of these firms are small businesses. Design build is a type of construction where engineers team with industry professionals. There are two forms of design build, two-step and one-step. Two-step requires the team submit qualification packages to the contracting officer in the first round. The contracting officer reviews them and notifies the teams if they are selected for the second round. At this point, the design build team develops expensive and detailed plans for the contractor to bid, generally without any reimbursement. Industry best practice has 3 to 5 finalists in the second round. In the recent years, there have been more than 10 finalists in some competitions, as current law allows the contracting officer to increase the number of finalists without limitation. This causes problems for both the industry and for the government. My firm's marketing risk is inversely correlated to the number of finalists, and the contracting officer must review all the proposals and give feedback to each team member that does not win the project, which is time-consuming. This issue has driven many, including small businesses, out of the federal market. One-step design build creates an even more precarious environment. One step allows the owner to solicit complete proposals from the construction market without a qualifications review. This forces out small businesses as they cannot spend dollars on projects where there are too many competitors, many of which that may not have the qualifications for the project. It is an inefficient process for the federal government as it asks the contracting officer to view multitudes of proposals. This committee has been a strong supporter of this issue, and we ask the committee to continue to improve the design build market by supporting the reintroduction of H.R. 2750. The second issue is the Court of Federal Claims ruling on the non-manufacturer rule poses a challenge for the construction industry, as it is a service industry that typically did not have to address this rule in the past. The rule exists to ensure that a contract for goods is restricted to small businesses rather than act as a pass-through for large entities. The Court's interpretation would require that any firm who is a prime contractor be responsible for their subcontractors' use of small business products, and potentially the many different tiers of subcontractors, as is undefined at this time. The burden on this rule is staggering, as I, as a business owner, would have to take the most conservative view to make sure that I am complying with the law. We have concerns that due to the unknown nature of this rule, that we can be penalized by an overbroad court ruling. ACC asks the committee to work with SBA on language to make sure that construction services and products continue to be excluded from the rule. I urge Congress to reintroduce H.R. 2750 and enact it into law. I also urge Congress to work with the SBA to limit the scope of the non-manufacturing rule on service industries. These bills can help my firm and other engineering firms to serve our clients' needs and thrive. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing, and I'll be happy to respond to any questions from the committee members.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I'd now like to introduce our next witness, John McNerney, who is General Counsel of the Mechanical Contractors Association of America, the MCAA. The MCAA represents about 2,500 firms involved in heating, air conditioning, refrigeration, plumbing, piping, and mechanical service. We thank you for your testimony here that you'll be giving this morning, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chabot. Good morning, Ms. Velasquez. On behalf of the 2,500 members of MCAA, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I am General Counsel, and I've been involved in the work of this committee for several years now, as have our members. We testified here several times on the old 3% withholding tax on Federal government contracts, and we commend your work on that. You were persistent, and we hope it doesn't come back again. That was a big threat to cash flow and prompt payment for all our members. We also would commend you for your recent activity having a naming rule for small businesses in prime contract small business contracting plans, and allowing those firms some assurance that they will be selected or have recourse to the contracting officer if they are not. Having said that, we also admire your persistence on the reverse auction rule. The Federal government lags the private sector in recognizing just how bad that practice is. So we hope this time we can pursue that to get it where it should be. The Corps of Engineers pilot study on reverse auction came in more than 10 years ago. They studied 9 projects, and they came out with a conclusion in about a 95-page report that said it was wholly unacceptable for low bid awards. But since then, it's been fitful by getting this Congress to do something about it. Our statement on it is attached to my written statement. In summary, it says simply this: there is a strong discipline in the sealed bid, low bid process that protects the project owner's best interest in well-considered judgments by its bidders. And all that discipline is lost in the publicly disclosed price auction with hasty and frenzied judgments imperiling careful offers and awards. You know, back in 2004 when this started, a lot of private sector industries took this up. Most of them have given up the project. And those who haven't have been fired by customers, fired by the contractors as their customers. And we think that the persistence of some government agencies to do this is impairing competition. So in all, I think there are 3 problems with the reverse auction. Number one, it shows that some bad ideas, like the 3% withholding tax, for example, have a habit of recurring. Projects that are mischaracterized as commodity purchases then are subject to the lack of discipline of the sealed low bid. And when construction projects are misclassified as commodity purchases, the government and the contractor are deprived of protections and benefits of the many standard FAR construction contract clauses that serve to allocate risk fairly. The unforeseen conditions clause, the equitable change clause, the prompt payment clause, and some of the warranty clauses too. So in summary on that point, we commend the committee for pursuing this and trying to get finally to implement the Corps' categorical assessment that this is a bad practice. Nothing has changed since then that would mitigate that conclusion. So we look forward to your reintroduction of that bill. We would also suggest when you do that, that you can, excuse me, consider expanding it to FAR Part 15 negotiated procurement. And Part 14 sealed bid is where we're looking at it now, but we understand that many agencies are going to a species of negotiated procurement, low price technically acceptable, where once the team is evaluated, it becomes a low bid process. So we need to legislate those kind of controls into that process. Our members are having anecdotal evidence that there are selection abuses, excuse me, in LPT awards as well. On the individual surety reform, we are fully in support of the industry consensus. There is no harm and only benefit to closing the individual surety loophole where there can be illusory assets and fraud and bad practice there. Your reform preserves the possibility of individual surety, but protects against the abuses. So we think that that can only increase competitiveness in that market. And on the non-manufacturing rule, I talked to my members, and they said they can't buy a chiller from a small business company or an air handling unit or mechanical equipment. It is entirely inapt for our industry. So with that, sir, I'll stop and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony. And we'll introduce our final witness here this morning, who's Andrew Hunter, who is Director of Defense I'm sorry. Oh, I apologize. Yes, my bad. I'd like to yield now to the ranking member.
I guess that you started out on the wrong track today. Mr. Chairman, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Andrew Hunter. Mr. Hunter is the Director of the Defense Industrial Initiatives Group and a Senior Fellow for the International Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies here in Washington, D.C. He focuses on issues affecting the industrial base, including sequestration, acquisition policy, and industrial policy. Prior to joining CSIS, Mr. Hunter served as a senior executive at the Department of Defense, including as Chief of Staff to Ashton B. Carter and Frank Kendall, while each was serving as Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. Welcome, Mr. Hunter.
Well, thank you, Chairman Chabot and Ranking Member Velasquez. Thank you for the opportunity to testify to you today about contracting in the industrial base. I am Andrew Hunter from CSIS, and as mentioned, prior to being at CSIS, I worked at the Department of Defense under 2 Undersecretaries of Defense for acquisition. And prior to that, I spent 17 years working in various capacities in the House of Representatives. So this is a little bit of a homecoming. and a happy one. A major focus of my work at CSIS involves understanding the evolving partnership between the Federal Government and the industrial base. This partnership is critical to the successful execution of the more than $400 billion in Federal contracting that occurs annually. I have a particular focus on how this partnership is evolving between industry and the Department of Defense. However, CSIS performs in-depth analysis on data from all Federal agencies, and I'll try to keep that hat on today. The industrial base is important because without it, the Federal Government cannot function. The health of the industrial base, therefore, is of critical importance to the nation as a whole. While Federal contracting is only a small portion of the overall economy, it's nonetheless very important to certain sectors of the economy and the industrial base, especially those that focus on government-intensive areas such as defense, transportation, and health care, not least of great importance to many small businesses. Contract obligations represent the overwhelming majority of the Federal spending that is received by industry, and examining the contracting data is essential to understanding what's happening in the industrial base. I'll briefly summarize some of the chief findings of the analysis that CSIS has done on this data and try to provide some context for the discussion today and hopefully for the committee's work in this Congress. Our first central finding is that sequestration is currently the dominant force in Federal contracting, with repercussions that have been particularly severe in defense contracting, but also across the board. And we're in the midst of a significant reduction in Federal contract obligations that's affecting every sector of the contracting world and the industrial base. Within that overarching story, secondly, there's an important dynamic going on specific to research and development. Federal contracting for research and development performed by industry is particularly challenged under sequestration, potentially impacting the historical role that small businesses have played in technology innovation that Ranking Member Velasquez referred to in her opening statement. A great deal of the cutting-edge innovation has its source in small business. They're frequently incentivized to pursue innovative technologies that larger businesses don't have the same incentive to pursue. And that's been important to the nation over many years. R&D contract obligations are declining much more rapidly than overall contract obligations. And we've not reached the bottom yet, even though we're likely approaching the bottom for contract obligations overall. Third, small business contracting is highly sensitive to changes in the overall Federal contracting environment. Small businesses are likely to be significantly affected, therefore, by a return to sequestration level spending levels in 2016. Contract obligations with small businesses plunged in the first year of sequestration, 2013, then happily but somewhat unexpectedly recovered very well in 2014. I believe the reality for small business, in truth, is somewhere between the crisis picture that the 2013 data presents and the relatively healthy picture that the 2014 data presents. But I suspect that a return to full sequestration would send us again in the sharply downward direction. And then lastly, the composition of small business participating in Federal contracting has been significantly reshaped since 2000, which is when a lot of the Federal data started to become widely publicly available, contracting data. And much of this has been the result of policies established in the Small Business Act. And I mention this to point out that the future direction chosen by this committee will shape the future of small business contracting over the next 10 to 15 years. And so it's very important. The work of this committee is very important. And lastly, I just want to emphasize that the continuing, in some cases increasing complexity of the Federal contracting process, referenced by many of my colleagues here, remains the most significant barrier to entry for firms of all sizes in the industrial base, particularly small business. And small businesses are challenged to absorb the overhead required to successfully navigate through this vast complexity. And I would say when you're making these decisions, I would suggest that you tend to err as much as possible on the side of reducing complexity in all of these approaches. So thank you, and I stand ready to address your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hunter. We thank all the panel members for their excellent testimony here this morning. And I'll begin with myself with 5 minutes of questioning. How can we get more small business construction companies to compete for federal work as either prime contractors or subcontractors. And Mr. Gibson, if you don't mind, I'll start with you, and anybody else that would like to weigh in is welcome to do so.
Taking from my own experience, sir, as a small business, I would say that the way to invite more firms to get interested and involved in federal contracting would be to hopefully take some of the regulations away that sometimes deter firms from entering the marketplace, and also to enhance the teaming and partnering ideas that we've been talking about in my testimony today. Lots of times a firm needs a mentor or somebody that's been in the federal construction process, allowing them to team, show their own qualifications, share the qualifications of their partner, get involved, learn the ropes. That would be an opportunity for them to ease their way into the marketplace.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hoffman, did you want to weigh in on that, or Mr. McNerney?
Sorry. My members would agree with that ability to partner and team more. My very small members, of which I have many, do that, and they would like to do more of it. And the idea that all the team members would be evaluated is a good idea. Any more discerning selection criteria is highly favored by my members because they prosper when the selection criteria is high.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Mr. Hunter, do you want to weigh in?
I would just say, I think this gets a little bit to the design-build discussion that happened earlier, that the more that you can make it easy for companies to get in the front door and participate, the better. I think having more companies engaged in the front end of the process is a good thing, and it's true that the bid and proposal costs can be one of the major barriers to entry. I think the trick a little bit in that is for the government, having to evaluate based on a list of qualifications makes it a little bit hard on the contracting officer to withstand bid protest. Mm-hmm. And that bid protest is something that we're seeing has a very pervasive influence throughout the contracting process. It's driving many more of the decisions that get made than I think it was ever really intended to be driving. And so I think that sort of that larger story is playing out in the design bid and the construction context.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Mr. Hoffman, I think I'll start off with you on this one. Some would argue that by only having 5 teams submit full bids on a design build project, we're limiting competition. Could you explain why the 2-step process is actually pro-competition, arguably pro-competition?
Yes, sir. First of all, the first phase of competition is open to everyone, so everyone is able to participate. And then with respect to the second step, what we're going to find is that the most experienced architect, engineers, and construction contractors are going to step out if there are more than 5 construction contractors. So we're going to have less qualified people participating in federal projects because the opportunity to win that project with significant investments is dramatically diminished once you go beyond the 3 to 5 recommended in industry practices.
Thank you. And then I'll have each one of you just address this very, very briefly, if you would. If you could just tell us legislatively what you would like to see us do, if there are 1 or 2 things that we could do that would really make a difference. Maybe I'll start with Mr. Hunter this time and go in the opposite direction. Mr. Hunter, if you wanted to suggest 1 or 2 things.
Yeah, I'm going to make a suggestion that may be slightly hard to implement, but as I mentioned, I think trying wherever you can to reduce complexity in the system is the way to go.
I would go with Mr. Gibson's reducing the regulations, basically. Yeah.
Yes, and of course you have to be careful. Many of these regulations have a history; they exist for a reason. But I think there are frequently less complex ways to implement the statute and regulations and to get the same job done.
Okay, Mr. McNerney.
Mr. Hunter's about the roadblocks and the complications from bid protest is a good one. And I don't know how you would legislate that, but our members prefer a more robust evaluation, a past performance evaluation on completed contracts, more robust than it exists now, and better if you had that and more widespread use of the federal awardee past performance information system. I think would help bolster selection criteria, exclusions, if you will. Again, I think that our members on the Maine would like to see the selection process be more discerning, and I think that that would increase competition. Some of my members say they will not compete in the Federal market because of not so careful selection procedures.
In order to enforce my 5-minute rule against myself, I'm going to cut it off at that point, and I'll either talk with you briefly or in a second round, or we'll get back to it. But I now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Hunter, in evaluating the awards to small businesses over the last few years, there seems to be a trend in which the dollar value of small business contract has increased. And what effect does this concentrated dollar value have on the small businesses' industrial base?
Yeah, and it's a very interesting point. And as someone who spends a lot of time analyzing contract data, it would be great if we could dig deeper into that and understand, is it because the locus of where the awards are happening within the space of federal contracting? In other words, is it because it's more construction happening and less in the world of supplies? Because that can affect contract size. Construction projects are going to be bigger than most commodity purchases. But having not carefully analyzed it at this point, my suspicion is that it's not that it is in fact that the average awards are growing bigger across the board, because our data shows that small businesses are generally succeeding in the areas where they've always succeeded in the contracting process. And I don't know if that's being driven by the way the government is putting out solicitation and proposals. That would generally probably be the first place to look.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that bundling has a lot to do with that?
It certainly could. It could also be that some of the smaller purchases, which may have historically been done with small businesses, if they're now being done with a purchase card at Walmart, that may be driving some of that smaller business in directions away from small businesses. And I think if it's an issue of interest, having someone take a deeper look at that, those trends would be good.
Thank you. Mr. McNerney, during its pilot program of reverse auction, the Corps found that the process may move too quickly for competitors to accurately reassess their costs or the way they will actually do the work. There have been even reports we have heard in which the buyer had to step in to prevent a supplier from submitting a price that will harm the company. Do you believe that contractors are actually able to perform the contract at the price they bid, or are some of them putting the viability of their company at risk?
All of that, Ms. Velasquez. I read the report on the way on the subway down here, and the Corps of Engineers says all of that very emphatically. And I talked to some of my members yesterday who were involved in the pharmaceutical industry, was a big adopter of this back in the 2002, 2003. I won't name the company, but I asked him, I said, did you continue to bid that work as either prime and sub? And he said, no, I fired that customer. And because when the hasty judgments, the first Corps of Engineer pilot study ended up in a bid protest because the prime contractor who won said he did not mean to push the button the last time, ironically. So that tells you, what is that, an error in judgment or a clerical error?
Do you believe then that some of the same concerns that we see in construction, reverse auctions, will exist in other industries?
I think it is very, very likely. The Corps of Engineers report said that for commodities it can be done well and it can help you find the lowest price. But the hearing you held last year with the VA didn't prove that out.
Right. Okay, thank you. Mr. Hunter, the contribution of small businesses to R&D has long been recognized as critical to our economy and national security, as this firm has developed some of the most innovative technology. You noted in your testimony several areas of your in some areas of your testimony, the decline in R&D contracting at the Department of Defense, indicating that this is a worrisome trend that is incompatible with achieving national objectives. Can you explain this statement and what this trend means for the industrial base?
Yes, what we found is that the magnitude of the reduction in contract obligations for R&D is much greater than what you see overall. And I think that's a result of the fact that for the Department of Defense for certain, and for many federal agencies, there's a lot of rigidities within their budget that make it very hard to cut in other areas. Obviously, in the case of the Department of Defense, there is a strong desire to avoid cuts to things like military compensation. And so then the cuts have to be taken elsewhere. And R&D is inherently something that can be rescheduled and retasked fairly quickly. Because you're inventing things and you can't invent on a schedule, the contracts are all designed to reflect, to be rewritable or adjustable as work proceeds. And that's good in an R&D context, but it also means it's very easy to, when the budget cut comes, to take money out of that contract.
Well, let me ask you a last point. Given the fact that when it comes to R&D spending, agency has so much flexibility, how can we reverse that trend?
I think it's making it clear that this remains a priority. And I mentioned in my testimony that the goals and objectives that have been set in statute have actually reshaped the way that contracting is being performed. And so I think continuing to emphasize the importance of research and development and innovation is a key thing.
Thank you.
Gentlelady's time's expired. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Hanna, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Boy, there's a lot to talk about. The 3% rule is gone. Relax. I can't imagine it coming back. In the last Congress, we worked on some of the subjects you mentioned, Mr. Gibson. In particular, reverse auctioning is, I mean, you all stated it one way or another, but it's a race to the bottom. I think we worked with Department of Defense. I think that with the Chairman's permission, I'd like to continue on that path, because I couldn't agree with you more. When all you have to do is click a button to be lower than the guy a moment before you, it does add, as you said, a degree of irrationality, and everyone wants to work, and so everyone always thinks they can do a little bit better than they thought. So I get that. In terms of the overall conversation, though, about bidding in general, one of the problems with the whole process is, and one of the reasons for bid protests, is the very subjective nature of everything you do, which feeds back to the conversation over reverse auctioning and why it's such a bad thing. But how do you protect the interest of the public and at the same time limit the number of bidders? How do you take out those elements that cause people to protest bid? Because it's easy to do, and it's easy to find a reason to do that. And I personally was in that business for many years, so I've seen it, a lot of that. I guess it's hard to have everything, and like with Mr. Hunter, how do you have a vibrant industrial base, have sequester, and have an efficient R&D, an effective R&D, and still have the right to cut back on the costs of doing business? I mean, you can't just fund an industrial base because you always want them to be there. You can't just pay people to manufacture things because someday you may need them, although you could argue that you might. I wonder how you balance all that, and Mr. Hoffman, maybe you'd like to say something about it, and anyone else.
Well, with respect to competition, the issue for us would be the design build piece. So everyone has the opportunity through sources sought, so small business can participate in that, and it can be set aside, irregardless of whether it's small business or it's unrestricted. Small businesses can participate in as part of larger teams, and everyone would benefit. And the standard to follow the best practices of 3 to 5 bidders, so that we can go ahead and make sure the best qualified teams are pursuing things and do the best work.
So really what you're saying is you need a better way to qualify bidders, limit the number of bidders, and frankly, let the government have a more thoughtful and deliberate process for deciding not just how many, but who and what. And I'm interested, though, Mr. Hunter, what do you think of how do you maintain all that?
Well, I would say, I think this issue of how does the government basically arbitrate amongst proposals, and if it's a list of qualifications, it may be a case that everyone has great qualifications and it's very difficult to discern the difference, or it may be the case that it defaults to whoever has the longest history of past performance, which again is not going to necessarily get new entrants into the process. I know the Department of Defense and in the R&D context, a lot of time they use an approach that's referred to as a white paper, and so you're asking folks to give you, at a relatively low cost, something that's fairly short, but some description of what the approach that they would take to the problem would be. And that at least can provide a middle ground. I'm not sure how well it works in the construction context, because how far can you go into talking about a construction project before you're into some significant expense? But in other contexts, that can provide I think, a way for the government to distinguish and to kind of cull out the best folks to do the more expensive proposal. And I would say on your question about innovation, I think prototyping can be something that's a good middle ground, if you will, that allows for you to do work on innovative technologies without going to the expense of, again, designing an entire system that the government probably doesn't have the funding to actually purchase.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from California, Ms. Chu, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, this question is for anybody on the panel, and it has to do with reverse auctions. You have all been pretty vociferous in being against reverse auctions for the construction industry, and you have said that it doesn't guarantee the lowest price, may encourage imprudent bidding, doesn't allow for a thorough evaluation of value, and doesn't ensure that the successful bidder is responsive and responsible, and may in fact go against federal procurement laws. And in fact, the Army Corps of Engineers study found that it didn't even offer marginal savings over a sealed bid process. I find that very interesting, because the reason for reverse auctions in the first place was to get to the lowest price. So I'd like your comments on any of these factors that have come out because of the reverse auctions.
Yes, ma'am. As a construction contractor, I can tell you that you might have what you think is the lowest price at time of award, but it's the price you pay on the outcome determines the real price of the job. If you have losses, if you have under-prepared proposals in there, they're going to come to life during the performance of that contract, and they're going to cause the government buyer a lot of problems. So I think it's just it's putting up a smokescreen as to what real cost is when you invite that type of imprudent bidding. And I will give you one example. As a construction contractor, most typical jobs I bid involve about 30 to 50 crafts, other companies coming to me to offer their services, 5 to 10 offerers in each craft. There's several hundred people offering prices on bid day. 60% of those prices come in within the last 2 hours prior to the bid deadline. So in the reverse auction process, how does the contractor have the opportunity to go back to those people and say, can you do better? He's making a guess, and those guesses end up costing the government in the long run.
I might add that with respect to engineering services and reverse auctions, they don't look at life cycle cost analysis and total cost of ownership. So the lowest cost is not necessarily the best cost. So if we look at construction and facilities, that cost is a small fraction of the total ownership cost once you go ahead and look at ongoing operation and maintenance. And I'd urge you to take the committee to to consider that, and I think you can only focus on first cost and reverse auctions. I have no idea how you're able to understand what the total cost is of ownership when you do that.
I would just emphasize what Mr. Gibson said. Reverse auction is the antithesis of a best value selection process, which I think is also the answer to Mr. Hanna's question. You know, the government has gone to design, build, best value to get away from the problems that existed in contract claims and disputes and defensive contract administration back when all projects were low bid before 1984 Competition and Contracting Act. So I think, Mr. Hanna, the answer to your question is, too, you've got to, you know, you've got to allow the CO to have governed discretion. He has the contracting warrant. He has to make discretionary judgments, and the bid protest agencies have to back them up.
Yeah. If I may change topics, Mr. Gibson, the SBA has 2 surety bond guarantee programs that guarantee 70 to 90% of the bonds up to $6.5 million in value to assist small businesses. However, many construction companies aren't using the program, and the individual sureties have filled the void. Why do you believe construction companies aren't utilizing the program, and what are the steps that could make this program more attractive? Like, for instance, if they were guaranteed by 100%, or if the total guarantee value is increased from $6.5 million.
Ma'am, I have to tell you that I'm not a surety expert. I've had the same the relationship with my same surety for 40 years, one surety. So I know very little about their operations. I trust the solid company that I've been working with for 40 years, and I'd prefer to defer to somebody else on the panel that might be able to talk about those distinctions.
Okay, anybody else on the panel?
Well, I would just say about surety bonds, I think it's reflective of a larger issue in federal contracting, which is access to capital. And I think historically, when the federal government was sort of a bigger part, federal procurement was a bigger part of the overall economy, there was always just an assumption that it was a gold standard, that the private sector would always be willing to front the capital to make a federal contract work. And what we're finding is that that is not as true anymore. The margins to be made on government business are not as attractive in many cases as what companies can find, you know, in the tech sphere. And so it's just not as attractive to a lot of companies to engage in this business, and it takes a little more effort on the part of the government to get companies involved.
The gentlelady's time's expired. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Gibson, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And just to start off, to both Chairman and Ranking Member, I'm excited to join the committee. You know, looking forward to our work together. Small business, a huge part of upstate New York. And so to get this opportunity to provide a voice for our small business owners is a real privilege. A good session here. I'm learning quite a bit and appreciate the comments. Definitely taking notes here with regard to reverse auction, the bidding process, and how we're proceeding with protests, insights that you're providing for improvements. I'm going to make a couple of observations of things that I've heard in my time moving around the 19th Congressional District, and somewhat informed by the 29 years I had in uniform before I came to Congress. And I'll be interested in your commentary or perhaps policy recommendations that may be able to address some of these things. I don't think there will be anything surprising about what I'm going to mention here. Just given your expertise, I'd love to hear if you have some thoughts on how we could change law or insights on regulation to do better. The first is, I had a company in Kingston that I thought was really doing excellent work with regard to protection for our troopers, body armor and protection of both people and equipment. But they were having a hard time getting the attention of the DOD. And so sort of the first phenomenon is there something about the processes, the RFP and whatnot, that would cast the net a little wider and allow for small businesses who are doing really creative stuff to make sure that they knew what the government was looking for, and for the government to get a better appreciation or even situational awareness on what small businesses are doing, number one. And number two is somewhat related. I have and I don't think this is a epiphanal comment, but one of the value added of small businesses is that you really see agility, you see responsiveness, and you see boldness in terms of pulling things together. Then the issue comes one of scale. You go ahead and you really hit it, and you hit it well, but then how do you compete? And what I saw in my time in the military is it almost seemed like the DOD would rather safe side it and go to a bigger company, even if they might have been impressed with some of the ideas of a smaller company, because they didn't want to take on the risk. And so there was this issue of scale. And maybe there's a finer point on design build on this score, but I'd be interested in anyone from the panel commenting on those two general points. And then if you have any policy recommendations, love to hear them.
I can just speak from personal experience on your scale issue. As a small business contractor, I have observed an inclination over the past several years for the purchasing agencies of the government to prefer the larger contractors. And I've actually had it said to me by agency representatives that they think they're buying down risk when they hire the larger contractors. And we've had to be creative to work as a small business to work around that. We've had to go outside of our marketplace, our custom marketplace, to find work.
Actually, with respect to scale, I think if we talk to the various agencies, it's interesting. Many times the contracting officers and some of the project managers appear to be willing to embrace the utilization of small businesses, but then they also need to sell to their customers, and their customers can be more risk adverse. Certainly, we've seen a good many sources sought and a good many opportunities for small businesses, at least in our sector, to participate, and we appreciate that. With respect to policy changes, again, in our testimony, we'd suggest the reintroduction of H.R. 2750 and the clarification of the non-manufacturing rule.
I think your example actually about troop protection is a really great case because that's one where the government tends to want to take a low-risk approach for very understandable reasons that you can certainly appreciate, and that it's expensive to test some of these items and to prove out that they meet the specs that the government's looking for, which are fairly stringent. Interestingly enough, there's a program at the Department of Defense called the Foreign Comparative Test Program that exists for a similar reason, to allow the department to test out equipment from overseas that may be something that we don't have here, and to pay for the testing just so that it can show that what its capabilities are. And I think having some small amount of budget to sort of demonstrate, allow small companies to demonstrate what their products can do, so that the buyer then doesn't have that fear that a smaller firm may not have designed something that's going to stand up over time or meet the spec. And the Army has done good work on this with field testing, essentially, of articles in the electronics realm that has really expanded the envelope of people able to participate. I think in troop protection, that could be a very valuable example.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Thank you, gentlemen. And we will go to a second round at this time, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'm not sure if I'm going to take the whole 5 minutes, but my last question in the previous round, I had asked, what legislatively would you like us to do? And we'd heard from Mr. Hunter and Mr. McNerney, so I'd like to give Mr. Hoffman and Gibson an opportunity to suggest what maybe legislatively you'd like to see us take up. I'll prompt you by giving a couple of bills that I know that we're considering now, and I think you may be somewhat familiar with. One is Chairman Hanna's bill relative to surety bonds, and another is 2750, which is a design build bill, 2751, which has to do with the reverse auction. These were in the last Congress has introduced, and I'm sure we'll be working on them this Congress as well. Another was the non-manufacturing rule, and also teaming and joint venture legislation. So those are some of the things. So you could either comment on those if you'd like to, or other things if you'd like to bring to our attention, what you would actually like to see us do. And maybe I'll begin, either one of you. Mr. Hoffman, you want to go?
Thank you. Actually, each one of those rules are in our written testimony, and we would encourage the committee to pursue and pass those proposed reforms, and that would be what we'd be looking for, sir.
Okay. Can't be much more specific than that. Thank you. Mr. Gibson?
Absolutely the same. We support all of those and have added that to our testimony as well today.
Okay. Thank you very much. You know, I think I'm going to stop there. I got the answer I wanted, so thank you. So I'll now yield to the gentlelady from New York, the ranking member, Ms. Velasquez.
Yes, I would like to go back to Mr. Hunter. You know, we are now reviewing the budget for FY 2016. In your testimony, you mentioned that your data shows that small business contracting numbers increased in the last fiscal year despite the cuts imposed by sequestration. So can you explain, give us an explanation as to why that happened, and if what can you tell us regarding the spending levels that are proposed for FY 2016 in terms of if it represents a significant risk for small businesses' growth?
I'll do my best. The safe answer would be to say we need more data, but what we have seen in several areas, and I'll try to maybe highlight a little and not be cryptic. For example, we saw big differences between the military services and the way that their contracts were playing out. So the Army's contract obligations have sort of fallen off a cliff. The Navy showed surprisingly little variation in their contract obligations. And then the Air Force was somewhere in the middle, and it was very hard to understand how you could have three such different outcomes when they were all facing relatively the same level of cuts. 2014 data has now come in. We find that, in fact, it's the Navy whose contract obligations have gone down now quite a bit in 2014, much more so than 2013, and the other services not as much. And I think what is happening is that things are shifting around. You know, so there's this semi-artificial barrier there, which is the end of the fiscal year, one fiscal year, the start of another. And to some extent, the appropriations in terms of when they go on contract can be fungible across that boundary. And so I think there's a lot of shifting that's going on. And so I think work from 13 got shifted essentially into 14, partly probably due to the uncertainty when sequestration kind of came down in the middle of the fiscal year, and partly because of strategies that different agencies adopted. And so I suspect that if you were to sort of take the 2 years and average them out, that might be, and assume that in reality, sort of that there was more of a steady state trend line there, and that those two numbers are extremes and the reality somewhere in the middle. I suspect that's the case. So taking me then to 2016, you know, this question of does it go back down to the full sequester levels and another drop, or does it now start to go in a positive direction in terms of the total federal obligations? It's going to, I think, again, kind of, you know, it'll be in some ways a surprise to agencies, whichever outcome occurs, because they've budgeted now for what the President's level is, which is higher, and if it ends up going back to sequestration, there's going to be that surprise again, and I think that's why I think it'll be a sharp drop if that happens.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Hanna, is recognized.
Thank you. Surety bonding. You know, there was a bill in the last Congress that almost made it, died but for one person in the Senate. You're familiar with that? Basically, it meant that bonding had to be backed by real assets. It's not that complicated and not that much to ask. We know that it hasn't always been that way. I'd just like to give you a chance to talk about that, Mr. McNerney and Mr. Gibson. You're both in that racket, so.
There are those notorious cases that you've all heard from the NSABP and the surety and fidelity, the individual surety who pledged coal waste as the security for a bond. You know, if there were a claim made on that, my contractor would have been out of luck. He would have been on the hook for all his payroll and everything else when the prime failed. So I just think it's a very good government abuse. It's just a transparently bad loophole in the law. The contracting officers don't deal with it properly. it's more prevalent than you would think, I'm afraid, what I hear from NASBP. It's just, I don't think you lose the virtues of independent.
Bonding, excuse me, but it's always been based on a zero loss ratio.
Right.
As soon as you factor in any loss at all, you're degrading the contractor and you're degrading the process.
Right.
You'd agree with that, Mr. Gibson?
Yes, and I would say that we're here talking about small businesses. That loophole is very dangerous for small businesses who are thinking about getting into the federal marketplace. You don't want to step into the federal marketplace without a solid surety behind you, and you can't get a solid surety unless you're solid yourself financially. So this committee should help protect small businesses by closing that loophole.
Thank you. Mr. Hunter, implicit in your statement, and I'll just admit, just for myself, that sequestration is pretty ham-fisted and not nearly as discriminate and as any thoughtful person would want it to be. But knowing that the other issues with the debt and the deficit and the way people feel about all that, and I agree with that, how do you maintain research and development, and how do you maintain these companies without just throwing money at them to make sure they're in business when you need them? Because that's implicit in your statement, and yet that's not logical necessarily to everyone, and certainly not to me. So you got 2 minutes. I mean, I'd kind of like to know about that dynamic, because we have in my district companies that are deeply invested in doing work for the government and find themselves through sequestration in trouble right in the middle of things that they're doing that everybody thinks are important. It's an interesting problem.
It is, and I think the government needs to be very discriminating about how it approaches and how it invests its R&D dollars. And so I think that's kind of the answer in both directions to your question, I would argue.
Well, you'd agree. You just can't throw money at the problem.
You can't throw money at the problem, and we don't need to be investing government dollars where the private sector is going to invest its own dollars. And generally, they're probably going to, I mean, history shows they're going to be successful in that in enough cases to make it not worth the government investing. So I think the government then has to focus. When R&D budgets are declining, the government has to focus very hard. There's a tendency to say, well, we're going to invest in an area because we invested in it last year. We thought it was good then, it must still be good now. And at a time like this, you really need to revisit those assumptions and say, maybe the world has moved on. And in some cases it has. In communications technology, the advancements on the commercial side are so rapid that it's highly unlikely the government investment is ever going to keep up with that.
Can I speculate and say that sequestration isn't all bad because it's made some people more thoughtful about how they do things and how they manage their total budgets?
I would say the government should be thoughtful without sequestration.
But maybe it'd help.
And part of the problem with sequestration is it doesn't allow a lot of thought, right? So we end up cutting everything, even the things that are critical and necessary. And yes, we may have cut some of the things that were less critical and necessary, but we cut them exactly 10%, not 100%, as maybe we should have. And so I think it's those rigidities and that mechanism.
Except in the last, they did allow for discretion in terms of that. That was the original way it went, but that changed. So.
Well, but there are still rigidities within the budget process that tend to drive the cuts to certain areas, R&D in particular, more so than places where we maybe should be cutting.
Thank you. My time's expired. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Gentleman's time's expired. We want to thank all the witnesses for their participation here this morning. It's been very helpful, I think, to the committee. The testimony we heard, I believe, shows that there are changes this committee can make to improve the competitive viability of small construction and A&E contractors and improve the health of our industrial base. We look forward to working closely, I think, on this issue and all issues. And I want to ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you, sir. Yes. Nice to talk to you. Yeah. Nice to meet you. Sure. Nice to meet you. Great to meet you. Yeah.
insane way. He said that she burned up, pinned to the ceiling.
You know, I never thought I would get divorced, but the way I look at it, there's just more of us to love the kids now.
This is who we are, as perfect as we're supposed to be.
No matter how things change, what makes us wholesome never will. Honey Maid, this is wholesome.
Try new Honey Maid Go Bites. Crispy pockets with delicious fillings delivering protein and whole grains.
You totaled your brand new car. Nobody's hurt, but there will still be pain. It comes when your insurance company says they'll only pay 3/4 of what it takes to replace it. What are you supposed to do, drive 3/4 of a car? Now, if you had Liberty Mutual new car replacement, you'd get your whole car back. I guess they don't want you driving around on 3 wheels. Smart.
With Liberty Mutual new car replacement, we'll replace the full value of your car. See car insurance in a whole new light. Liberty Mutual Insurance.
I have the worst cold with this runny nose. I better take something.
Dayquil Cold and Flu doesn't treat your runny nose.
Seriously?
Alka-Seltzer Plus Cold and Cough fights your worst cold symptoms plus your runny nose.
Oh, what a relief it is.
Introducing IHOP Crisp.
Never tasted anything like this.
Baked, filled, folded, then topped. Try blackberry lemonade or sweet cream cheese with strawberry rhubarb.
It's a croissant, but it's
been waffled.
Croissants at a price you love and only at IHOP.
Crisscross croissant.
Montel here from Money Mutual. I'd like you to meet Bob.
I'm good at my job. I'm not so good at paying parking tickets. To get the boot off, I needed $800, and I sure couldn't drive to a payday store to get it.
So Bob called Money Mutual. They have a network of short-term lenders who can get you up to $1,000 in as little as 24 hours. They've helped over 1 million people get short-term cash. Bob's customers say that he's one in a million. So do we. Go to moneymutual.com or call 1-800-585-CASH.
Everything for my home, everything for me.